Gildan Media, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Miracle Club, How Thoughts Become Reality, by Mitch Horowitz. Narrated by Mitch Horowitz. Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote in Powers of Laws and Thought, "Metaphysics is dangerous as a single pursuit. We should feel more confidence in the same results from the mouth of a man of the world. The inward analysis must be corrected by rough experience. Metaphysics must be perpetually reinforced by life, must be the observations of a working man of working men, must be biography." To working people everywhere. In memory of Helen Wilmans. Purpose. Ralph Waldo Emerson called for a philosophy for the people, a simple, dynamic, truthful guide to living ethically and with power. This is my response to that call. My wish is to bring a new tone of maturity to the most popular and disparaged of all modern philosophies, positive thinking or new thought, which grew partly from Emerson's work and has spread in various forms and differing vocabularies throughout modern life. The guiding principle of positive mind metaphysics is thoughts are causative. I consider this outlook applied transcendentalism and explore it on practical terms in this book. I call this book The Miracle Club in homage to my heroes who run throughout it, men and women of the late 19th and early 20th centuries who blazed a path of practical spirituality for everyday people and who dedicated years of personal experimentation and search to distilling simple, effective methods by which to expand your day-to-day experience and possibilities. The term Miracle Club has its earliest roots in a group of esoteric seekers who banded together in New York City in 1875 to explore the ineffable. That year, one of the club's founders received a mysterious letter telling him, "Don't give up thy club. Try." This book is, in some regards, a resumption of their efforts. I define miracles quite simply as circumstances or events that surpass all conventional or natural expectation. I ask you to join me in pursuing such possibilities in your own life, not only through the medium of ideas, but also in a more direct manner, as I describe at the end of the book. In laying out these aims, I refuse to shrink from the one question before which every ethical and spiritual philosophy must stand. Does it work? Yes, mind metaphysics works. It is a philosophy of results. If you determinedly join my experimentation in this book, and if you follow these ideas and methods as though your life and happiness are at stake, which they may be, you can evaluate the results in the quality of your daily experience and in how your conduct affects others. In matters of practical philosophy, experience is the only means of empiricism. Chapter 1. A Useful Idea. For all the radical changes in how we live over the past 150 years, from the rise and fall of political ideologies to the revolutions in medicine and technology, the basic sense of human identity expressed by Shakespeare remains intact. Each of us plays his part, living, serving, struggling, until mere oblivion. We sometimes bring a ripple of change to our surroundings, coming to a perspective on God or a higher power, or attaining a cherished goal, just as we sometimes suffer a life-altering tragedy. But overall, we remain bound to a familiar pattern. One modern idea has challenged this template of life. One idea has suggested that we are not merely players, but also possess a creative agency that can determine and reshape life. This idea helps us view technological, scientific, and social changes not only as revolutions in themselves, but also as expressions of aptitudes and capacities that grow in response to human aspiration. On an intimate level, this idea may save you when you feel that all possibilities are lost. It is this: thoughts are causative. Born loosely from the traditions of New England mental healing and transcendentalism in the mid-19th century, this philosophy came to be known as New Thought. I argue in this book that for all its shortcomings, and for all its being disparaged by critics as a dogma of wishful delusion, New Thought in its essentials is true, and can be tested in your experience. This is a book of practical use. I also argue in this book that New Thought has stagnated. It has not matured since 1910, the year that marked the death of philosopher William James, who took seriously the challenge that thoughts possess formative properties. James wrote about the religion of healthy-mindedness as a sympathetic investigator and critic. Today, however, New Thought culture, known by the popular terms positive thinking and law of attraction, is often unquestioning and childish in its language and temperament. It is unexperimental. In this regard, its critics are right. Yet they are not right enough. The perspective of the critics requires leavening by experience. But experience will not touch the staunchest among them simply because they avoid participation in ideas. Most psychologists and journalists are trained to see participation as a corrupt and misleading tool of inquiry. The medical field has proven more open, as will be considered. A case in point appears in the career of literary journalist Lewis Lapham, who helped reinforce today's intellectual tendency that practical spiritual ideas are not worth testing. In 1968, Lapham visited northern India to join the Beatles on their sojourn to the ashram of the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the founder of Transcendental Meditation, or TM. Lapham was a progenitor of the New Journalism, not a term he claimed for himself, an approach to reportage intended to include an expressly participatory element. His widely read two-part article for the Saturday Evening Post, There Once Was a Guru from Rishikesh, was disdainful of the charismatic bearded guru and his propagation of TM. Yet it never occurred to Lapham to use the easiest and plainest means available to test his instinct that there was something fishy about the robed man selling bliss, namely, sitting his bottom on a cushion and trying the TM technique. If desired, a mantra, the basic tool of TM, is about as easily attained as a learner's permit to drive, and was at that particular time and place much easier. In 2017, nearly 50 years after his visit, I asked Lapham, a gentlemanly and approachable man, whether he had learned to meditate at Rishikesh or another time. His reply: "Even in Rishikesh, I didn't practice transcendental meditation. The Maharishi furnished me with a mantra, but I failed to employ it as a stairway to the stars." There was no curiosity to approach the thing being judged. Cultural journalist Tom Wolfe demonstrated a similar laissez-faire attitude toward the spiritual trends he covered. Wolfe has privately expressed sympathies for New Age or therapeutic spirituality, but he avoided participation in any of the Aquarian Age spiritual pursuits that he chronicled in the late 1960s and early 70s. Wolfe feared that association with things like Zen, yoga, or TM would make him seem unserious in lettered circles. Again, experience as a means of inquiry was eschewed. This book is not about arguing for or against a certain style of reportage or social commentary. Rather, it is about the need for participation in ethical and spiritual ideas. Readers who want a fuller analysis and history of positive mind philosophy can find it in my earlier work, One Simple Idea. This book is different. It is a guide to use. I wrote above that the most radical idea of modern life is that thoughts are causative, and that is a fact. This outlook is spiritual or non-physical in nature, although there are secular variants of it. As you can gather from what I've written, I do not simply view this idea from behind a glass case. I also share it. I have sat through many meetings with producers, reporters, interviewers, and scholars of religion, where the conversation invariably turns to the question, "You don't believe this stuff, do you?" Yes, I do believe this stuff. I believe, as did the pioneers of New Thought, that there is a slender thread of difference between mental and metaphysical experience. By metaphysical, I mean the existence of extraphysical influences that accompany and complement cognitive and motor acts. I believe that thinking, in a directed, highly focused, and emotively charged manner, expands our capacity to perceive and concretize events, and relates us to a non-tactile field of existence that surpasses ordinarily perceived boundaries of time and thought. This outlook is less a personal doctrine than a line of experimentation. I ask you to join me in these experiments. Our experimentation culminates in the closing chapter, where I venture a theory of what is actually and mechanically occurring when we attempt to use the formative agencies of thought. Let me emphasize, if I posit a connection between the individual and some kind of higher capacity of the mind, that does not mean that only one thing, a law of mentation, is going on in your life. Lots of events, whether biological, mechanical, or metaphysical, can be simultaneously occurring. We live under many laws and forces, of which the impact of the mind is one. For example, compare the mind to gravity. The law of gravity is ever operative, but it is mitigated by other laws, such as mass. The experience of gravity radically differs on the Moon, Earth, and Jupiter. So it is with the mind. Surrounding events and realities matter. What's more, one event may be symptomatic of another. Some science journalists, for example, argue that the release of pain-reducing endorphins is what happens during the placebo response. Yet many things occur during the period of hopeful expectancy that sometimes precedes physical relief. The production of antibodies, combating of pathogens, strengthening of immunity, and reductions in inflammation are among the more measurable. It could also be argued that these and other physical events, when following periods of intensive prayer, meditation, or improvements in morale, are what mental healing and the spiritual appeal look like in the body. The question of what happens is equally intriguing in matters of psychological health. Many psychiatrists have noted that the expectation of recovery from depression is the key factor in whether any recovery occurs at all. I have witnessed psychological and emotional recovery beginning when an individual makes a commitment to undergo a serious form of treatment, such as electroshock therapy or hospitalization. Relief begins to arrive before the treatment actually starts. I personally know of cases where the treatment itself became unnecessary or was more efficacious than expected because improvement was in process following the patient's commitment and before the start date. Therapists have observed that the commitment itself and the willingness it represents to charge at a problem with all available resources is therapeutically meaningful. The sense of moral agency that arises when you cross a threshold, when you commit to withholding nothing in pursuit of a solution, can amount to the solution that is sought. The mental act is catalyzing. I want this book to be useful, and there are, of course, many good and practical guidebooks to New Thought. Why add another? Because, as alluded to earlier, New Thought has not grown, or rather, its temperament and discrimination have not. Its ideas appear in many potent works, from The Science of Mind by Ernest Holmes, to Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, to Resurrection by Neville Goddard, my personal favorite. Recent books by figures like Deepak Chopra and Greg Braden have connected New Thought to developments in quantum theory. But the philosophy has fled from, rather than embraced, its toughest questions, namely, the persistence of catastrophe, the inevitability of physical decline, and episodes of failure and illness, even in atmospheres where hope, resilience, and morale prevail. Above all, New Thought has failed to develop a theology of suffering. It has failed to take seriously gaps and inconsistencies in its ideas, often explaining exceptions to its worldview by resorting to jerry-rigged versions of karma, or claims that a single thought from millennia ago can affect someone today, which amounts to little more than an admission of the very randomness of life that the philosophy seeks to reject. At the lowest end of the scale, some New Thought enthusiasts still resort to a victim-blaming card, claiming, covertly or blatantly, that someone who is sick or has suffered catastrophe wasn't being just right with his or her thought vibes or affirmative prayers. New Thoughters hate being reminded they do this, but I've seen it. It must also be said that New Thought culture, for all its truths and wide-ranging influence on modern life, often under different names and without recognition of the original source, can demonstrate a decided childishness. Services at many New Thought-oriented churches are a cross between pep rallies and preschool birthday parties, with attendant exhortations from the pulpit, "Isn't this the most fun ever?" Slogans come cheap and fast. Pessimists need a kick in the cants. Many New Thought writers, with a few serious exceptions like Harvey Bishop and David Spangler, are willfully ignorant of political, religious, and social history, proffering an ahistorical and socially irrelevant tone. As a longtime publisher and writer within the metaphysical culture, I am often asked, what current books or writers in New Thought or the positive mind field excite you? The answer? Very few. I am unimpressed with the standards of many current authors in metaphysics and spiritual self-help. I know firsthand of numerous cases where authors have created composite characters, which is a lame way of incorporating events from several people's lives into one person, artificially heightening a sense of synchronicity and drama. I have seen authors compress or rearrange timelines, less with the aim of graceful storytelling than with inflating a series of events, giving the misimpression that things unfolded more quickly or symmetrically than they really did, or happened in a different order, suggesting, for instance, the absence of recidivism in addiction recovery. Finally, many authors alter names and locales, ostensibly to protect someone's privacy, but in reality, to protect themselves from scrutiny or verification of their stories. The methods I've been describing were popularized in 1977 in mystery writer Scott Turow's memoir of his first year at Harvard Law School, 1L. To his credit, Turow used these devices transparently and purposefully. Readers thrilled at trying to guess who he was talking about. His approach suited a certain endeavor written for a certain purpose. It was never intended and should not be adopted as a general method of nonfiction or spiritual storytelling. It has been abused within my field in particular. Surveying popular spiritual literature, a shrewd reader-reviewer on Amazon once challenged, "Where are the miracles today that seemed to abound in older New Thought books? Where are the little old ladies from Dubuque, Iowa, who wrote to authors like Joseph Murphy, author of the 1963 bestseller The Power of Your Subconscious Mind, exclaiming their stellar success at using one of his get-rich principles?" The truth is, I'm not sure where those stories are. Murphy and others might have benefited from a pre-digital culture where it was more difficult to scrutinize claims, to retrace footprints and correspondence, and when it was easier, frankly, for writers to make things up. The respected Protestant minister Arthur Caliandro, the direct successor to the Reverend Norman Vincent Peale at Manhattan's Marble Collegiate Church, acknowledged to me, unprompted, that Peale, author of The Power of Positive Thinking, sometimes juiced up his stories and sermons. Those of us in the positive mind culture must face up to those claims. Later in this book, in fact, I reproduce and respond to one of several candid letters written to Joseph Murphy after the author's death, in which dismayed readers asked why his get-rich, get-well methods didn't work wonders for them. I want to be transparent about the lesser side of our history. None of this, however, is cause for dejection or contention. Despite the shortcomings and the forays into exaggerated or mawkish claims, modern mind power methods have validity. William James spent the final years of his life, not exclusively but in part, studying and attempting methods in New Thought and related philosophies. He took this outlook seriously. So do I. There is truth to it, and together we will resume the tone and maturity of James's search. We will begin to probe anew. To start with, I promise you this: nothing in this book is juiced up, diced up, exaggerated, or concealed behind devices. Let me add a final word about language. Some colleagues have cautioned me that terms like positive thinking seem old-fashioned and musty. The phrase puts off younger or more sophisticated readers. There is truth to that. But the power of positive thinking, to use the title phrase of Peele's 1952 book, has so fully entered the public mind that most people have an immediate association with it. It is plain. For that reason, I have continued to use Peele's phraseology, musty or not. If I or someone else came up with something clearer and fresher, I would embrace it. I used the term applied transcendentalism in my prefatory note, but I doubt my Aunt Lois will ever be sold on it. I am also wary of jettisoning old terms such as ESP, New Age, and occult simply because they have taken on critical baggage and one hopes to arrive at something more respectable. All of the aforementioned terms possess historical integrity and cultural clarity. Hence, I will not be deterred by terminology when exploring why positive thinking, far from belonging to an outdated yesterday, may yet prove the most radical and useful idea of today. Chapter 2. Power to the People. My philosophical hero is Neville Goddard, an English Barbados-born New Thought teacher who wrote under his first name. He heard the following words in the midst of a personal vision: "Down with the blue bloods." To Neville, who died in 1972, privilege did not belong to the rich, but to the truly imaginative. Because of Neville's English background and elegant bearing, many people assumed he was born wealthy. He was not, far from it. Likewise, because of my New York background and surname, many people judged the same of me growing up. A school bus driver, upon hearing that I lived in a suburban development with gaudily named streets like Royal Way and Regent's Lane, said, "Oh, a rich kid, huh?" A truculent writer with whom I worked once, just once, called me college boy, inferring the same thing. Here's the truth, of which I rarely speak. My father was a legal aid society attorney in New York City who defended the poorest of the poor. For reasons beyond his control, he lost his job and profession, leaving us to consider applying for food stamps and warming our always unaffordable home with kerosene heaters. We wore used clothes and scraped together change and coupons to pay grocery bills. There were no Hanukkah, Christmas, or birthday gifts. My sister and I would buy them with our own money, earned from odd jobs, and pretend to friends that they came from our parents. In the words of the notorious B.I.G., birthdays was the worst days. One night, in desperation, my father stole my mother's engagement ring to pay debts over which he may have been physically threatened. He had started carrying mace spray. They divorced. My older sister and I got by through after-school jobs, student loans, and the precious availability of health benefits through my mother's labor union, the 1199 Hospital Workers. Given the economic devastation visited on many American homes, including during the still unhealed 2008 recession, I do not consider our story exceptional. But when someone assumed then, or does today, that the son of a Jewish lawyer is necessarily born on Easy Street, he is wrong. This brings me to something else that I rarely mention. Today, I am a millionaire. It's not because I'm a hotshot media figure or deal maker. In my day job at the time of this writing, I publish occult and New Age books, not your typical path to wealth. My wife, the daughter of a single mother family, is a television news producer. We raise 2 sons in Manhattan. We have no family cash cow. And yet, to draw again on the notorious B.I.G., now we sip champagne when we thirsty. Why is that? Because Neville, in my estimation, was correct. Wealth, to some extent, comes from within. Let me quote the woman I honor in the dedication of this book, Helen Wilmans. A suffragist and New Thoughter, Wilmans rose from dirt poverty on a Northern California farm in the late 1890s to command a small publishing empire. What? Wilmans wrote in her 1899 book, The Conquest of Poverty. Can a person, by holding certain thoughts, create wealth? Yes, he can. A man, by holding certain thoughts, if he knows the law that relates effect and cause on the mental plane, can actually create wealth by the character of thoughts he entertains. But, she added, such thought must be supplemented by courageous action. Never omit that. Wilmans's career was a New Thought parable of liberation. While working as a newspaper reporter in Chicago in the early 1880s, she became one of the pioneering female reporters of that era. Everything had gone against her in life. She was fired from jobs, divorced from her farmer husband, left to raise 2 daughters on her own, and lived one step ahead of eviction from her Chicago boarding house. More than anything, Wilmans yearned to start her own labor newspaper. She wanted to bring the ideas of mind power to working people. One day in 1882, she asked her Chicago editor if he would invest in her venture. He dismissed the idea out of hand. In despair, Wilmans ran from the newspaper offices, probably not wanting her male bosses to see her in tears, and wandered the darkening streets of Chicago on a November afternoon. She thought to herself, I am completely alone. There is no one on whom I can depend. But as those words sounded in her head, she was filled with a sense of confidence. It occurred to her that she did not have to depend on anyone else. She could depend on the power of her mind. This was the New Thought gospel. I walked those icy streets like a schoolboy just released from restraint, Wilmans wrote. My years fell from me as completely as if death turned my spirit loose in paradise. Like Wilmans, I had never dreamed of wealth or wanted to be surrounded by fancy things. I believe in labor unions, moderately redistributive tax policies, and personal thrift, not gross consumption. But there is something vitally important to earning a good living, and that fact cannot be hidden or ignored. Nor can this. Your mind is a creative agency, and the thoughts with which you impress it contribute to the actualized events of your existence, including money. This statement is absolutely true and should never be neglected. I have tested and verified it within the laboratory of my existence, and I am writing these words at age 50. I will consider later why it is true, but for now, if you want money, I ask you to wholly embrace it as true. This necessary act of conviction will not, in any case, lead you to rash behavior. It does not suggest neglecting daily obligations or loosening your hands on the plow of effort. To have wealth, you must first want wealth. Do you? Or do you consider money gauche or unimportant? Whether you are an artist or activist, soldier or craftsman, you must see wealth as a necessary and vital facet of your life. You can do far more good with money than without it. You must recognize money as a healthful part of existence. Nothing is more duplicitous than someone who runs down acquisitiveness while enjoying money that comes from well-off parents, a situation typical of many in the New York media world in which I work. Or a public persona who scoffs outwardly at money while employing sticky-fingered lawyers, agents, or other parties to comb the earth for money for them. As a publisher, I've seen it many times. By contrast, strong people admit that they want money, among other goals, and in so doing are neither in the service of falsehood nor shame. The same holds true of your ambitions in the world. Spiritually minded people and all others should honor their ambitions and pursue them openly and transparently with due respect to colleagues and competitors. Yet this is frowned upon in
Sample complete. Ready to continue?